spoke up when my family tried to ruin my pregnancy celebration with their drama. She accused me of trapping her brother with a baby, but she never expected what happened next, right in front of the whole family. What started as a dream turned into public humiliation, a family war, and a shocking ultimatum that changed everything forever. You won't believe how it all ended. I, 26F, had my surprise pregnancy celebration last weekend at our apartment. We intentionally kept the event small and intimate. Just my boyfriend Evan, 27, our immediate families, and a few of our closest friends. Evan and I have been together for almost 3 years now, having met through mutual friends during our final year at university. 4 months ago, I made the huge decision to move in with him after finding out I was pregnant with our first child. I was honestly terrified when I first saw those 2 pink lines on the test. We're both still fairly young, just starting to build our careers, and we had never actually lived together before. On top of that, our families had only met a few times and barely knew each other beyond polite small talk. But despite all these possible complications, we both genuinely wanted this baby and already felt a connection to the little life growing inside me. So, we made the mutual decision to make it work, no matter what challenges came our way. After a lot of deep conversations about our future, we agreed that we would get formally engaged soon, and then have a proper wedding once the baby arrived and things calmed down. My family was completely supportive right from the start, offering help and showing genuine excitement about becoming grandparents, aunts, and uncles. However, Evan's older sister, Sabrina, 30, and his mom, Lillian, went through what can only be described as a complete personality change towards me after Evan officially announced the pregnancy and our plans to both families. Before that, they had always been friendly, welcoming, and seemed to fully approve of our relationship during family gatherings and holidays. Afterward, though, their demeanor became cold, distant, and increasingly passive-aggressive whenever we were in the same room, creating a really uncomfortable atmosphere. A few days after the announcement, Evan confided in me that they had confronted him privately about everything when I wasn't there. Even though they swore him to secrecy and begged him not to tell me, he felt it was important that I knew. Their objections mainly boiled down to 2 major issues. First, Sabrina was set to get married to her boyfriend of 6 years in just 4 months, and she felt our pregnancy announcement was stealing attention away from her special moment that she had been planning for over a year. Second, and far more insulting to me personally, they suspected that I had deliberately gotten pregnant in some calculated attempt to secure my place in their family because of their comfortable financial standing and reputation in the community. For some important context, Evan's family is undeniably well off and has deep roots in the area. His father, Gregory, owns and operates a very successful regional construction company that employs over 50 people and handles major commercial and residential projects across the state. Meanwhile, his mother, Lillian, manages their extensive real estate investment portfolio, which includes multiple rental properties and commercial buildings spread across several neighboring counties. They live in a large, beautiful home in an exclusive neighborhood, complete with all the perks that come with decades of hard work and smart investments. In contrast, my parents both work respectable but modest jobs in healthcare administration at the same regional medical center. We're solidly middle class, comfortable enough, but definitely not wealthy by any reasonable standard. We've always lived decently, but without the luxuries and financial security that Evan's family enjoys as a given. Given this disparity, their accusation that I had deliberately orchestrated this pregnancy as part of some calculated attempt at social climbing to improve my financial situation wasn't just offensive, it was deeply hurtful on several levels. It completely dismissed the genuine love and bond Evan and I had developed over the past 3 years. Thankfully, Evan didn't believe or even entertain any of these insulting insinuations for a moment. He immediately told me everything so I wouldn't end up confused and hurt by their increasingly cold behavior without understanding where it was coming from. Despite how much the accusations stung, we ultimately chose not to cut off contact with Sabrina and Lillian, mainly because Gregory specifically and repeatedly asked everyone involved to keep the peace for the sake of family harmony. Several major life events were coming up on the calendar, including Sabrina's wedding just 3 months away, and eventually our own ceremony, after the baby's arrival. Gregory made it clear he wanted to avoid any dramatic confrontations or public signs of discord that might cast a shadow over these important occasions. Since Gregory had consistently stood up for me from the very beginning and treated me with genuine kindness, Evan and I reluctantly agreed to remain outwardly civil with Lillian and Sabrina, more out of respect for him and his wishes than out of any real desire to maintain relationships with them. As my pregnancy progressed and my bump became more noticeable, Gregory thoughtfully suggested that Evan and I consider getting formally engaged a little sooner than we had originally planned. His reasoning was that, since I was visibly starting to show, an official engagement might present a more favorable impression to their extended family members, business associates, and broader social circles who might otherwise gossip or pass judgment on our situation. We were already comfortable with that idea anyway, as it aligned with the plans we had already discussed, so we went ahead with the engagement and organized a modest celebration afterward to mark the occasion with close friends and family. However, instead of easing the tension, Sabrina and Lillian seemed even more upset and agitated following our engagement announcement. They started making more frequent and pointedly unsubtle remarks within earshot about how our timing was suspiciously close to Sabrina's planned wedding, as if we were trying to overshadow her special day on purpose. I genuinely struggled to understand the basis of their persistent concerns about our timing. We had clarified multiple times during family gatherings that we absolutely wouldn't even consider getting married until long after the baby was born, and we had adjusted to parenthood. Even after that, we realistically knew we'd need several more months to properly plan a wedding that would satisfy both families. By any reasonable calculation, our eventual wedding would likely happen at least 9 to 11 months after Sabrina's celebration, making any notion of competition for attention completely irrelevant given the substantial separation and timing between the two events. The tension finally boiled over into open conflict during my pregnancy celebration last weekend. Without any warning or previous conversation, Sabrina deliberately approached me while I was chatting with some friends and pointedly asked to examine my engagement ring up close. When I innocently extended my hand to show her the ring Evan had chosen, she loudly commented within earshot of several nearby guests about how expensive the diamond and setting must have been, drawing unwanted attention to the interaction. She then proceeded to make what she later insisted was just a joke, that even if Evan ultimately decided against marrying me after the baby arrived, my child and I could always pawn the ring and live quite comfortably for a while on the proceeds. Before anyone had a chance to respond to her inappropriate comment, Sabrina added with a thin smile that I should be sure to keep the ring stored somewhere safe, just in case my obvious plan to baby trap her brother didn't end up working out the way I intended. Every person standing nearby clearly heard her deliberate, loudly spoken remarks, and the entire room fell into an uncomfortable silence for a moment. She delivered these incredibly inappropriate comments with a bright smile plastered across her face, followed by a forced laugh. Tellingly, only Lillian joined in with her own half-hearted chuckle, while everyone else stood awkwardly quiet or shifted their gaze away in embarrassment. I stood there frozen, completely speechless, unable to form any kind of response to such an unexpected and public attack on my character and intentions. Evan immediately stepped forward, anger flashing across his face as he began to confront his sister. But before he could fully express his outrage, Gregory stepped in first. His face flushed red with embarrassment as he sternly demanded that Sabrina apologize at once for her completely inexcusable behavior toward a pregnant woman at her own celebration. When Sabrina stubbornly refused his direct request, repeatedly insisting it was just a harmless joke and that everyone was overreacting, Gregory made an announcement that clearly shocked everyone in the room. He said that if Sabrina was so deeply concerned about potential gold diggers joining their family, then perhaps she should prove her financial independence by paying for her own extravagant wedding because he personally would not contribute another single cent toward the considerable expenses she had planned. At that particularly tense moment, I finally managed to find my voice after the initial shock wore off slightly. With more confidence than I actually felt, I said that I genuinely thought Gregory's suggestion was an excellent and appropriate idea under the circumstances, considering Sabrina's obvious concerns about financial motivations. Without any hesitation, Gregory immediately confirmed his decision then and there to fully withdraw all financial support previously promised for Sabrina's upcoming wedding. Absolute chaos broke out instantly after his declaration. Shouting erupted from all directions. Tears started flowing. Accusations were hurled across the room indiscriminately by various family members. My increasingly uncomfortable friends quickly made excuses and left the toxic environment, leaving only our immediate families behind. The argument dragged on, feeling like endless hours of heated circular accusations. On one side of the living room stood my upset parents, a protective Evan, a resolute Gregory, and my overwhelmed self, while on the opposite side, Sabrina and a defensive Lillian remained stubbornly entrenched, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing whatsoever. Eventually, as it became clear that the argument was going nowhere and my stress levels were climbing dangerously high, I firmly told Sabrina and Lillian they needed to leave immediately. I explained that I was becoming excessively upset and that my doctor had warned me how harmful stress could be for the developing baby. Finally, after more muttered comments under their breath, Sabrina and Lillian stormed out. Gregory stayed behind, offering a sincere and heartfelt apology for everything that had happened. He explicitly told me that I no longer needed to pretend or maintain any polite facade with them moving forward. He emphasized that he completely understood if I chose to have absolutely nothing to do with either of them from now on. I graciously accepted his apology, recognizing that, underneath his initial insistence on family harmony, he was simply an old-school, traditional family man who was trying, perhaps desperately, to hold his fractured family together in a situation that was spiraling beyond his control. In the tense days following the confrontation, Evan and I deliberately cut off all direct communication with members of his immediate family, except for Gregory, who still checks in on us periodically with genuine concern. Despite our clear boundaries, Sabrina and Lillian have continued relentlessly bombarding Evan's phone with accusatory text messages and voicemails at all hours. They dramatically claim that I have single-handedly destroyed their once harmonious family dynamic. Their messages repeatedly stress how they supposedly can't afford Sabrina's elaborate wedding now, that Gregory has completely stopped speaking to Lillian after decades of marriage, and that somehow, bizarrely, it's now my personal responsibility to fix everything, acting as if all the problems stem from my actions, rather than Sabrina's wildly inappropriate public behavior. Evan has been visibly stressed out by their endless guilt-tripping and dramatic messaging, even though he reassures me over and over that he wants absolutely nothing to do with their manipulative tactics or unnecessary drama. Even so, I can't help but feel at least partly responsible for how badly things escalated, especially because I openly encouraged Gregory's spontaneous decision to withdraw funding for Sabrina's wedding, something that undeniably took an already tense situation to a whole new level. So, considering all of these complicated circumstances, I'm wondering, am I wrong for vocally supporting my future father-in-law's decision to completely stop paying for my sister-in-law's wedding? Edit for clarification. Since many people in the comments have been asking about the specific financial arrangements, I wanted to explain more clearly. Both Evan and Sabrina had separate wedding funds that their parents had been building up over many years to help cover their future marriage celebrations. For Sabrina's wedding, which is scheduled for 3 months from now, she and her fiancé Brandon's family had already made substantial deposits and prepayments for the venue, catering, flowers, photography, and other major wedding elements. According to the family's previously established financial arrangement, which had been agreed upon months ago, Gregory had planned to cover all the remaining considerable expenses associated with Sabrina's wedding. He was also planning to write Sabrina a comprehensive check shortly after the ceremony to fully reimburse her for everything she had already spent from her personal savings to secure the various services. This arrangement had been specifically designed to simplify the otherwise complicated process of handling wedding finances between multiple parties, ensuring that Sabrina wouldn't have to drain her savings for an extended period of time. But now, given the current circumstances and Gregory's firm decision, things have taken a very different turn. Since most of the elaborate arrangements were already formally set up with vendors through mostly non-refundable deposits and binding contracts, Sabrina realistically can't back out of any of these commitments without suffering significant financial losses on money that has already been paid. If Gregory sticks to his decision and refuses to reimburse her as originally planned, Sabrina will be completely stuck paying for everything herself, without the financial safety net she had been counting on throughout the entire wedding planning process. Her fiancé, Brandon, and his extended family, unfortunately, are in a surprisingly similar financial situation to mine. They are generally comfortable in their day-to-day lives but certainly not wealthy enough to cover the cost of the extraordinarily extravagant wedding Sabrina had eagerly planned, especially since it was done under the assumption that her father would be footing the majority of the bill. Now, with the wedding date quickly approaching and a mountain of financial obligations that can't easily be canceled or adjusted without severe penalties, they find themselves facing genuine financial trouble. Update 1. After reading through countless comments and reflecting deeply, I finally mustered the courage to have an open, heart-to-heart conversation with Evan about everything he's been silently dealing with during this entire family conflict. I approached him gently, asking if he felt any resentment or disappointment toward me, especially since I had undeniably played a role in escalating the situation by vocally supporting Gregory's decision to withdraw financial support. Evan immediately and emphatically reassured me that, while he is understandably upset about the overall deterioration of his family dynamics, I am absolutely the last person he would ever consider blaming for any of it. Looking me directly in the eyes, he said he was actually proud of me for finally standing up for myself after months of enduring subtle insults and passive-aggressive behavior from his mother and sister. During our long conversation, he thoughtfully pointed out that my seemingly impulsive comment supporting Gregory wasn't unfair or unreasonable at all, especially considering the bigger picture. How Sabrina and Lillian had consistently and repeatedly implied, through countless subtle comments, that I was nothing more than a calculating gold digger who trapped Evan through pregnancy. He spoke with genuine emotion, telling me he couldn't even imagine how emotionally exhausting these last several months must have been for me, having to act like everything was fine at family gatherings while knowing full well what they truly thought of me behind my back. He acknowledged that while, up until recently, they had at least kept their offensive opinions relatively private and hadn't confronted me directly, Sabrina's so-called joke, made deliberately in public at my own pregnancy celebration, had crossed a clear line of basic human decency. Evan said he was honestly relieved that I had finally spoken up instead of continuing to silently endure their increasingly obvious hostility and disrespect. As the evening went on, Evan admitted that the source of his visible stress lately isn't just about the past incidents, it's about the growing realization that Sabrina and Lillian almost certainly won't just let this conflict fade away naturally with time, like he had originally hoped. He explained that, in the early stages of all this tension, he had secretly held on to some hope that everyone might eventually reconcile through honest communication and understanding. But based on their recent behavior and the escalating hostility in their messages, that outcome now feels more unlikely with every passing day. What's genuinely weighing on Evan at a profound emotional level, he quietly confessed, is the increasingly painful realization that this family rift may not only stay unresolved but could actually worsen by the time our innocent baby arrives in just a few months. As he opened up with more emotional vulnerability, I completely understood and empathized with the complicated feelings he was struggling with. I reflected honestly that, if members of my own family were acting this irrationally and creating so much unnecessary drama during what should be a joyful time of celebration and preparation, I would feel exactly the same way. Up until this crucial conversation, I had been intentionally giving him a lot of emotional space and distance, genuinely believing that solitude and time for private reflection were exactly what he needed to process everything that had unfolded between his family members. However, after hearing the depth of his emotional struggle during our extended heart-to-heart, I instinctively reached out and hugged him tightly without saying a word. That simple act unexpectedly became the emotional catalyst that made him break down completely, something I had never seen from him before throughout our entire relationship. Over the next hour, he vulnerably poured out all of his deeply conflicted feelings with raw honesty. He told me how emotionally torn and divided he feels, because despite everything, their inexcusable behavior, the hurtful actions, they are still his mother and sister. They are the family that had been there his whole life, long before I ever came into the picture. He shared, with genuine sincerity, that he truly wants them to be involved in our child's life. He wants them to create the kind of special family bonds and memories that he treasures from his own childhood. But at the same time, he was very clear. They must sincerely apologize to me and make genuine efforts to repair the damage they caused before any kind of reconciliation could even be considered. The fundamental problem making any resolution difficult is that Sabrina and Lillian remain absolutely convinced, despite all evidence to the contrary, that this entire situation is exclusively my fault. According to the distorted perspective Evan has gathered from their many text messages, they firmly believe that Gregory's decision to pull wedding funding would have only been a temporary bluff meant to discipline Sabrina in the heat of the moment, and that he never would have actually followed through if it weren't for my supposed encouragement pushing him beyond his original intentions. During our conversation, I asked the question that probably anyone outside the situation would naturally wonder. Why couldn't Sabrina and Lillian just adjust their expectations and pay for the wedding themselves, considering their financial resources? After all, Sabrina holds a well-compensated professional position with plenty of discretionary income, and Lillian manages their family's profitable real estate portfolio, which brings in substantial passive income. Evan's response shed more light on the complexity behind all of this. He explained carefully that, at this point, it's no longer really about the money. It has evolved into an ego issue and a full-blown power struggle. They both insist that Gregory must honor his original promise to pay for the wedding expenses because he explicitly made that commitment many months ago during the early planning stages. They simply can't psychologically accept or process the idea that he's now breaking that promise, especially because, in their minds, it's my negative influence that caused it. Despite their endless stream of desperate and accusatory messages, Evan has stood firm. He deliberately chose not to respond to any of their communication, keeping the strong boundary he set immediately after everything happened. However, Evan's silence hasn't discouraged them in the slightest. They continue persistently trying various manipulative tactics, clearly aimed at making him feel a growing sense of guilt and familial obligation for their current predicament. Through multiple daily messages, they repeatedly and forcefully insist that I personally should somehow step in and magically fix the deteriorating situation among all parties. Apparently, they expect me to convince Gregory to reverse his financial decision, despite everything that's happened. Even though everyone directly involved, including Gregory himself, clearly sees that they are the ones who owe me a sincere apology for their inappropriate public behavior, Sabrina and Lillian still refuse to accept responsibility and continue deflecting blame. This continually escalating family conflict has unfortunately been draining nearly all of Evan's mental and emotional energy, at a time when we should be joyfully preparing for our baby's arrival. Instead, it's becoming harder and harder for him to focus on anything else important, including his professional responsibilities and the major life changes approaching with parenthood. Update 2. It's now been about 12 days since the disaster at the celebration. This morning, completely out of the blue, I finally heard from Lillian and Sabrina after their long silent treatment. I hadn't blocked either of them because, as unlikely as it seemed, I wanted to leave the door open for a possible apology. When Lillian called, I answered immediately, but set firm boundaries from the start. I told her up front that if she was calling to argue or convince me I was wrong, she should hang up now because I wasn't interested. I would only continue the conversation if the call was for an apology. When she stayed on the line, I let her speak. Lillian and Sabrina, apparently on speakerphone together, proceeded to apologize for their behavior. They admitted that they had acted petty and inappropriate, especially considering how far along I am in my pregnancy, when they should have been trying to reduce my stress, not add to it. They acknowledged that their actions had hurt not only me, but also Evan and Gregory, which they claimed was never their intention. They admitted the breakdown within the family was entirely their fault, even though they had initially tried to shift the blame onto me. They explained that they had spent several days trying to justify their behavior and convince themselves I was responsible, but eventually, they were forced to confront the truth. They were in the wrong. Their pride had prevented them from apologizing sooner because they didn't believe I deserved it at the time. But now, they said, they felt ashamed of their actions. They asked if I would consider forgiving them and whether I would join them, along with Evan and Gregory, for a dinner to hopefully resolve our misunderstandings. I was caught completely off guard and didn't have an immediate answer. I told them honestly that I needed time to think. Their behavior hadn't just hurt me, it had deeply hurt Evan and Gregory too, and I couldn't speak for anyone but myself. I explained that if I weren't pregnant, the decision might be easier, but right now, my top priority has to be avoiding emotional stress. Our last interaction had been incredibly draining, and I wasn't eager to risk putting myself through anything like that again. I told them I needed time to decide if forgiveness was even possible and whether I truly wanted them to be part of my life moving forward. I also made it clear that I couldn't promise that making peace with me would automatically fix their relationships with Evan and Gregory, nor could I commit to attending a dinner gathering yet. There was a brief silence before they said they understood my position. Although disappointed that I couldn't immediately forgive them, they asked if I would at least pass along their apology to Evan. They explained that, after Evan ignored their many messages, he eventually blocked them completely, and they now felt terrible about everything that had happened. Even if I couldn't forgive them yet, they said, they would be incredibly grateful if I could at least help reconnect them with Evan. I hesitated because I knew Evan's decision to block them likely wasn't made lightly. I told them I would inform him about their apology, but that whether or not he chose to unblock them would be entirely his decision. I wouldn't involve myself further. They seemed disappointed but grateful that I would at least pass along the message. Before ending the call, they apologized specifically for suggesting that I was only with Evan for financial gain. They admitted that my actions had proven I cared about him more than anyone, maybe even more than they ever had. Otherwise, they said, I wouldn't have even answered their call or considered helping them after everything that had happened. I simply told them they were right about that. Because at the end of the day, the one thing we all share in common is that we love Evan and want him to be happy. After that, we ended the call. Update 3. It's been a few days since that phone conversation. I told Evan about his mother and sister's apology, but made it clear that the choice to reconnect with them was entirely his to make. I mentioned their request but reassured him that there was no pressure from me either way. Evan said he still needs more time to process everything and isn't ready to make a decision yet. For now, what he wants most is simply peace and quality time with me and our soon-to-arrive baby. These days, his routine is beautifully simple. Work, then straight home to me. Since I'm currently on maternity leave, I'm home most of the time. I've been using this quiet time to create a happy, calm environment for us, cooking his favorite meals, making our home as comfortable and welcoming as possible. The sweetest part is how he now comes home with little surprises, things he knows I'll love, even though I never ask for anything. And whenever he's home, he takes a few quiet moments to talk to our baby through my belly, something that melts my heart every single time. These past few days have been wonderfully peaceful. We haven't talked about the family drama at all. Gregory checks in from time to time, but otherwise, we've had no contact with the rest of Evan's family. Today, however, Evan asked me if I would be comfortable with him reaching out to Lillian and Sabrina again. I told him I'd fully support whatever decision he made. I know how important reconciliation is to him, and if he's ready, then I'm ready too. As we get ready to begin this next chapter of our lives in just a few weeks, letting go of the past feels like the healthiest choice. If Evan feels ready to forgive his mother and sister, I want to stand by him. We decided to call Gregory first to get his perspective. Gregory had already cautiously resumed limited communication with Lillian and Sabrina a few days ago, not because everything was fully resolved, but simply because living under the same roof without speaking had become unbearable. Things between them were civil now, but definitely not back to normal. The same went for Gregory's interactions with Sabrina, who had been visiting frequently. Gregory was enthusiastic about the idea of a family dinner. He thought it could help finally start healing the lingering awkwardness. With his blessing, we called Lillian and proposed having dinner together this weekend. She immediately agreed and looped in Sabrina, who also sounded genuinely eager. So this weekend, we'll all be sitting down to dinner together, hopefully beginning the process of healing these old family wounds. I know some people might disagree with my choice to give them another chance, but I believe in second chances. Everyone, myself included, has needed forgiveness at some point in their life. With our baby's arrival just around the corner, it feels right to begin this new chapter with peace, not bitterness or ongoing conflict. I talked it over with my parents too, and they agree I'm making the right decision. I don't feel the need to defend myself, but I'll say this. If someone chooses to criticize our choice to try and reconcile, that says more about them than it does about me. This makes Evan happy, and honestly, I'm hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, by the time our little one arrives, we'll actually feel like a normal, functional family again. Update 4. I'm so sorry for disappearing for so long without posting an update. It's been several weeks now, and truthfully, I just completely forgot to come back and update here. So much has happened since my last update, beginning with that family dinner. Honestly, the dinner went far better than I had dared to hope. Right away, Lillian and Sabrina offered sincere, heartfelt apologies. They expressed genuine shame for how they had behaved, admitting that their actions were tacky and completely unjustified, especially considering how respectfully I had always treated them. Their sincerity caught me a little off guard, so I stayed cautious at first. But over the weeks following that dinner, they consistently showed they were serious about making amends. They started visiting regularly, offering help with the baby preparations, and consistently making an effort to rebuild the relationship. After seeing that sustained effort over time, I gradually opened my heart to forgiveness. Then, just last week, I went into labor, with both our families present to support us. When our daughter finally arrived, the joy in the room was overwhelming, probably the purest happiness our families had shared in many long months. Since then, life with Evan and our daughter has been nothing short of beautiful. My parents, Gregory and Lillian, And even Sabrina and her fiancé have all been incredibly supportive, sending gifts, checking in, and offering help so that Evan and I can focus fully on adjusting to life with our newborn. That's my life now, completely wrapped up in our little one. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm so deeply grateful that everything worked out the way it did, and that our daughter will grow up surrounded by family members who truly love her. My little one is starting to get fussy, so I need to go for now. But I wanted to leave you with this. Sometimes, with patience and forgiveness, even the most broken family situations really can heal.